Jaycee Dugard disappeared on a morning that should have been safe. She was walking uphill to a school bus on a quiet residential street, dressed in pink, following a routine she had repeated dozens of times. And yet, within seconds, she was gone. For the next 18 years, her case would be defined by this contradiction. A child, taken in plain sight, from an ordinary place, not by chance, but by systems that failed to see what was already there. The telephone rings through the neighborhoods of Myers on a June morning in 1991, the same frantic question echoing from house to house. Have you seen Jaycee? The girl with the blonde hair. Always wears pink. She was supposed to be at the bus stop. Neighbors step onto their porches, shading their eyes against the morning sun, shaking their heads. Carl Probin pedals past on a bicycle, out of breath, his face flushed with exertion and something deeper, something that looks like panic. "Gray car," he calls out, to anyone who will listen. Did anyone see a gray car? The street remains quiet, offering no answers. Pink ribbons will begin appearing on mailboxes by afternoon. But right now, in these early hours, there is only confusion and the terrible question of where she has gone. To understand who has disappeared, you have to know who Jaycee Dugard is in the weeks and months before this morning. She is 11 years old, a fifth grader with blonde hair that falls past her shoulders and a devotion to the color pink that defines nearly everything she owns. Her closet holds pink shirts, pink shoes, pink hair ribbons organized by shade. When given any choice, markers, notebooks, the frosting on a birthday cake, she picks pink without hesitation. Her teachers know this about her. Her classmates tease her about it gently, the way children do when they recognize something harmless and consistent in a friend. Jaycee lives with her mother, Terry Probin, her stepfather, Carl, and her baby half-sister, Shayna, in a house tucked into the hillside neighborhood of Myers, just south of South Lake Tahoe. The family arrived here 7 months earlier, in September of 1990, after leaving Arcadia in Los Angeles County behind. Terry orchestrated the move, driven by the conviction that her daughters deserved to grow up somewhere safer than the dense suburbs sprawling across Southern California. Lake Tahoe promised everything she wanted: mountains rising on all sides, air that smelled of pine instead of exhaust, neighborhoods where people recognized each other and children could move freely without constant supervision. Terry works at a print house, spending her days operating heavy machines that stamp out business cards and wedding invitations. She comes home each evening with ink stains, darkening her fingertips and the sharp chemical smell of the shop embedded in her clothes. Carl manages the household, caring for Shayna during the day, keeping the house in order, preparing dinner so it is ready when Terry walks through the door exhausted from her shift. The division of labor suits them both. Shayna is Carl's biological daughter, born just months before the family relocated to the mountains, and his devotion to her care is absolute. Jaycee belongs to Terry from a previous relationship, but Carl extends the same attention to her, checking her homework and driving her to school activities when schedules require it. School comes easily to Jaycee in most respects. She makes friends without difficulty, talks constantly during bus rides, volunteers answers in class when she feels confident about the material. Teachers describe her as enthusiastic and social, occasionally prone to chattiness but never genuinely disruptive. She gravitates toward reading and art, filling notebooks with pencil drawings of horses and elaborate variations of her own name rendered in different lettering styles. At home, she contributes to the care of Shayna, holding the baby while Terry cooks, or folding the small clothes that emerge warm from the dryer. She protests about chores in the universal way of children, but completes them without extended rebellion. The Probin house sits in a neighborhood that embodies the particular quietness of mountain communities. Homes space themselves apart with pine trees growing thick between properties, yards sloping upward or downward according to the hill's natural contours. Residents know their immediate neighbors well enough to exchange waves and brief conversations, but mostly maintain respectful distance. Children occupy the streets freely, riding bicycles in wide loops or walking several blocks to visit friends. The atmosphere carries a sense of insulation from the dangers that dominate television news, as though the mountains themselves provide protection from the violent chaos of cities. Jaycee's routine follows predictable rhythms. She wakes each morning, selects clothing from her collection of pink garments, eats whatever breakfast Carl has prepared, and walks up the hill to catch the school bus. The route measures only a few minutes on foot, tracing a gentle incline along a residential street where traffic passes occasionally but never heavily. She makes this journey alone most mornings, backpack slung over one shoulder, sometimes humming melodies to herself or thinking ahead to whatever awaits her at school. A field trip occupies her thoughts lately, some planned excursion to a historic site that has her repeatedly reminding Terry about permission slips and asking speculative questions about stagecoaches. Carl frequently positions himself near a window during these morning departures, watching as Jaycee begins her walk. He observes her pink outfit, bright against the neutral tones of pavement and dried grass, moving steadily upward until the street's curve carries her out of sight. The gesture carries no special significance, simply the habitual vigilance of a parent, confirming that a child has started safely toward school. The bus arrives on schedule, Jaycee boards without incident, and the day unfolds as thousands of other days have unfolded. 7 months have passed since the family established themselves in Lake Tahoe, enough time for the initial strangeness of relocation to fade into familiarity. They have learned which stores offer the best value, which roads become impassable during heavy snow, which neighbors prefer friendly interaction, and which value privacy. Shayna develops according to the normal milestones of infancy, recognizing faces and responding to voices. Jaycee navigates 5th grade with adequate success, her report cards reflecting satisfactory grades and encouraging teacher comments. Terry and Carl experience the typical friction of blended families and limited finances. But they persist in constructing something stable here, something that feels more secure than what they abandoned in Southern California. The town of South Lake Tahoe spreads across the Sierra Nevada foothills, encircled by dense forests of evergreen and the vast blue expanse of the lake itself. Tourism drives much of the local economy, bringing skiers in winter and hikers in summer, but residential areas like Myers exist somewhat removed from the seasonal crowds. Year-round residents develop patterns independent of vacation traffic, discovering shortcuts and quiet locations that visitors never encounter. For Jaycee, this landscape is transforming into home. She has cultivated friendships here, accumulated shared jokes with classmates, identified preferred corners of the school library for reading time. 10th, 1991. The morning air in Myers carries the coolness that lingers in mountain towns even after sunrise, the kind of temperature that makes long sleeves comfortable but not necessary. Jaycee Dugard stands in her bedroom selecting clothes from the options available to her, and the choice is predictable. Pink shorts. A pink shirt to match. Pink shoes with white laces that she ties into careful double knots, her fingers working methodically through the loops. She slides a pink ribbon through her blonde hair, adjusting it until it sits exactly where she wants it. The outfit represents nothing unusual for her, simply another expression of the preference that everyone who knows her recognizes immediately. Terry Probin has already left for work at the print house, her departure occurring in the early hours before full daylight. Carl moves through the house attending to morning tasks, checking on baby Shayna who remains asleep in her crib. Jaycee finishes getting ready, grabs her backpack, and prepares to leave for the bus stop. The walk ahead of her is one she has completed dozens of times since the family moved here, a simple uphill route that requires perhaps 5 minutes of walking. Carl watches from a window as she steps outside and starts up the street, her pink clothing visible against the muted landscape of asphalt and dried grass. The street itself sits quiet at this hour, empty of significant traffic. Houses line both sides, most of them still and silent as their occupants sleep or prepare for their own days inside. Jaycee walks along the edge of the road, moving against the direction of what little traffic might appear, the way children are taught to position themselves for safety. Her backpack bounces slightly against her shoulders with each step. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barks briefly, then falls silent. A sprinkler system activates with a mechanical click, beginning its programmed arc across someone's front lawn. A car appears on the street, moving slowly, gray in color, mid-sized, possibly a Mercury Monarch, though witnesses will later struggle to identify the exact make and model. The vehicle approaches Jaycee from behind, then passes her, and continues up the road. It reaches a point ahead of where she walks, then executes a U-turn, the kind of maneuver that suggests a driver realizing they have missed a turn or gone the wrong direction. The car comes back down the hill, now traveling in the same direction Jaycee is walking, approaching her from the front. The vehicle slows as it nears her position. The driver, a middle-aged man, rolls down his window. Jaycee slows her pace, perhaps assuming the driver needs directions. A common enough occurrence on these residential streets where tourists and visitors frequently lose their way. The car pulls to a stop. What happens next occurs in seconds, too fast for the 11-year-old to process or resist. The man's hand emerges from the window holding a device. The stun gun makes contact with Jaycee's body, and electricity courses through her, disrupting her muscle control and her consciousness. She collapses, her legs unable to support her weight. The passenger door opens and a woman exits quickly, moving with purpose. Nancy Garrido crosses the small distance to where Jaycee has fallen and begins dragging her toward the vehicle. The child's backpack scrapes against the pavement. Her pink shoes leave scuff marks on the asphalt. Inside the car, Nancy strips away Jaycee's clothing, removing the pink outfit piece by piece. The only item that remains is a small butterfly-shaped ring on her finger, something Nancy either does not notice or does not consider worth removing. Jaycee lies on the floorboard in the back of the vehicle, consciousness flickering in and out like a damaged light, awareness coming and going in fragments. A blanket covers her body. The car begins to move, accelerating away from the residential street, away from the bus stop where Jaycee should be standing right now waiting for her ride to school. Carl Probin stands at the window of the house looking up the hill. He sees the gray car execute its U-turn. He sees a woman, the details are unclear from this distance, but definitely a woman, forcing something or someone into the vehicle. Recognition hits him with the force of physical impact. He moves immediately, abandoning the window and rushing outside. He grabs his bicycle from where it leans against the house and begins pedaling up the street, legs pumping hard, breath coming in gasps as he pushes the bicycle faster than he has pushed it in years. The gray car pulls away, engine accelerating, speed increasing rapidly. Carl pedals harder, standing up on the pedals to generate more force, but the gap between bicycle and car widens with each second. The vehicle reaches the end of the street and turns, disappearing from view. Carl continues pedaling for another block, hope and desperation propelling him forward even as logic tells him the pursuit is futile. The car is gone. Whoever was inside is gone with it. He returns to the house, dismounts the bicycle while it is still moving, lets it fall onto the lawn. Inside, he reaches for the telephone, fingers shaking as he dials emergency services. The operator answers, and Carl tries to explain what he witnessed, the words tumbling out faster than he can organize them coherently. Gray car, U-turn, woman, child forced inside, his stepdaughter, Jaycee, 11 years old, pink outfit, blonde hair, the bus stop. She was just walking to the bus stop. Inside the gray car, now miles away and moving steadily northeast, Jaycee drifts between consciousness and unconsciousness. The stun gun has left her body weak and uncoordinated, her thoughts scattered and fragmented. She manages to speak once during the journey, her voice small and frightened, shaped by the logic of an 11-year-old trying to negotiate her way out of a nightmare. "My parents can't afford a ransom," she says, the words directed at whoever might be listening. Nobody responds. The car continues driving, eating up distance, carrying her farther from South Lake Tahoe with every mile. The drive lasts 3 hours, covering 120 miles. Philip Garrido keeps his attention on the road, navigating highways and local streets with the calm of someone who has planned this route carefully. Nancy sits in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at the child hidden under the blanket on the floorboard. They cross from the mountain region into the flatter terrain of the Central Valley, passing through small towns and agricultural areas until they reach Antioch, a city in Contra Costa County where suburban neighborhoods sit adjacent to undeveloped lots and industrial zones. The car turns onto Walnut Avenue, a residential street lined with modest single-family homes. Number 1554 sits unremarkable among its neighbors, a small house with a backyard that extends farther than visible from the street. Philip pulls into the driveway. The garage door opens, and the car disappears inside. When the door closes again, Jaycee Dugard has vanished from the world she knew. She will not be seen again for 18 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The call from Carl Probin reaches the South Lake Tahoe Police Department at 8:30 in the morning, and within minutes, the machinery of law enforcement response begins to activate. Patrol units converge on the neighborhood in Myers, officers stepping out of vehicles and immediately beginning to canvass the area. Neighbors emerge from their homes, drawn by the presence of police cars and the growing sense that something serious has occurred. Carl stands in his front yard, repeating his account over and over, describing the gray car, the U-turn, the woman he saw forcing someone into the vehicle. His hands shake as he gestures, demonstrating the direction the car traveled, the approximate location where it stopped. Terry Probin receives the call at the print house, and the world tilts sideways. The voice on the other end tries to explain carefully, tries to prepare her, but there is no preparation adequate for what she hears. Jaycee did not arrive at the bus stop. Carl witnessed what appeared to be an abduction. Police are at the house right now. She needs to come home immediately. Terry leaves work without explanation, without gathering her belongings, without clocking out. She drives back to Myers with her foot pressed hard against the accelerator, her mind refusing to accept what she has been told, searching desperately for alternative explanations that might make this something less catastrophic than it sounds. By noon, the scale of the response has expanded exponentially. Local police have requested assistance from county sheriffs, from state investigators, from federal agents, whose jurisdiction includes crimes involving the transportation of minors across state lines. Search dogs arrive, handlers walking them through the neighborhood while the animals strain against their leashes, noses to the ground. Aircraft appear overhead, helicopters equipped with cameras that can detect heat signatures through forest canopy, fixed-wing planes flying grid patterns over the surrounding wilderness. The assumption driving these aerial searches is that Jaycee may have wandered into the woods, may be lost and injured, may be findable if they can just cover enough territory quickly enough. Terry Probin sits in her living room, surrounded by law enforcement personnel asking questions she cannot answer. When did you last see Jaycee? This morning, before I left for work. What was she wearing? Pink, everything pink. Does she have any history of running away? No, never. She would not do that. Can you think of anyone who might want to harm her? No one. We just moved here. We do not know many people yet. The questions continue, some repeated multiple times by different officers, the process feeling both urgent and futile. Carl sits beside Terry, providing his account of what he saw from the window, the details growing slightly less precise, with each retelling as stress and adrenaline erode the clarity of his memory. The first 48 hours are critical in missing child cases, a fact that every officer involved in the search understands with acute awareness. Statistics show that if a child is not recovered within 2 days, the likelihood of a positive outcome decreases dramatically. This knowledge drives the intensity of the initial response, the long shifts without sleep, the refusal to pause even for meals. Volunteers begin arriving from throughout the community, civilians who want to help in whatever way they can. They organize into search parties, receive assignments for specific areas to canvass, and fan out across the region calling Jaycee's name and looking for any sign of her presence. Terry establishes an organization she names Jaycee's Hope, a volunteer group dedicated to coordinating search efforts and raising funds for the investigation. Someone suggests pink ribbons as a symbol, a reference to Jaycee's favorite color, and the idea spreads through the community like a contagion of solidarity. Within days, pink ribbons appear on mailboxes, fence posts, tree trunks, storefront windows. The entire town transforms into a visible declaration of collective determination to bring this child home. Tens of thousands of flyers are printed, each one featuring Jaycee's school photograph and the details of her disappearance, and these are mailed to businesses across the United States in the hope that someone, somewhere, might recognize her. The investigation proceeds along multiple tracks simultaneously. Detectives interview everyone who lives on the street where Jaycee was taken, asking if anyone saw or heard anything unusual that morning. Most people report nothing helpful. One resident mentions seeing a gray car but cannot provide details about make, model, or license plate. Another heard what might have been a child's voice but dismissed it as kids playing. The testimonies accumulate into a picture of an event that happened quickly and quietly, Witnessed clearly by only one person, Carl Proben becomes a focus of investigative attention in ways that grow increasingly uncomfortable as days pass. He is the sole witness to the abduction. He is the stepfather, not the biological father, a relationship that statistically appears more frequently in cases of family violence. He was alone in the house with Jaycee that morning. Detectives ask him to submit to polygraph examinations, and he complies, sitting in sterile interview rooms answering questions designed to reveal deception. The results come back inconclusive, neither clearly establishing his innocence nor confirming guilt, leaving investigators uncertain how to interpret his role. Some members of the community begin to whisper, to speculate, to wonder if the person who reported the crime might actually be the person who committed it. Law enforcement checks registries of known offenders in the South Lake Tahoe area, running searches for individuals with histories of crimes against children or records of abduction. Several names appear, and detectives interview these individuals, verify their whereabouts on the morning of June 10th, and eliminate them one by one as suspects. What investigators do not do is expand their search to include the broader San Francisco Bay Area, a decision that will later be identified as one of the critical failures in the case. Philip Craig Garrido lives in Antioch, 120 miles from South Lake Tahoe, and his name sits in a database of registered offenders with a conviction history that includes kidnapping and assault. His 1976 crime occurred in South Lake Tahoe, the exact location where Jaycee was taken 15 years later. But because investigators limit their search radius, Garrido's name never appears on their list of suspects to investigate. As the first week becomes the second week, and the second becomes the third, the initial intensity of the search effort begins to show signs of strain. Volunteers who took time off work to participate in ground searches must return to their jobs. Donated funds that paid for flyers and search equipment start to run low. The helicopters and planes that crisscrossed the sky in the early days reduce their flight hours, then stop flying altogether. Tips continue to pour in from across the country, dozens each day reporting possible sightings of Jaycee in shopping malls, at rest stops, walking along highways. Investigators follow each lead, dispatch local authorities to check the reported locations, and every single one results in disappointment. The child described in the tip is not Jaycee, or there is no child there at all, or the witness was mistaken about what they saw. Terry Proben refuses to accept the possibility that her daughter is dead, clinging to hope with a ferocity that borders on defiance. She continues operating Jaycee's hope, continues organizing volunteer activities, continues speaking to media outlets who will give her airtime. Her marriage to Carl begins to fracture under the combined weight of grief and suspicion, the cloud of doubt surrounding his role in the investigation, creating distance between them that grows wider as months pass. Pink ribbons remain tied to surfaces throughout the community, fading in the sun and rain but replaced when they deteriorate beyond recognition. The case officially transitions to cold status after 6 months of active investigation producing no viable leads. Detectives do not close the file, but resources are redirected to newer cases, fresher crimes where evidence still feels warm and witnesses still remember details clearly. Jaycee's disappearance becomes one of hundreds of unsolved child abduction cases maintained in national databases, her photograph aging artificially through computer programs that estimate what she might look like as she grows older. The active search ends. The waiting begins. 120 miles from South Lake Tahoe, behind a small house on Walnut Avenue in Antioch, Jaycee Dugard begins an existence that will last longer than her childhood had lasted before she was taken. The backyard compound where she is held measures roughly the size of a basketball court. But this space is subdivided into zones by fences, tarps, and improvised structures that create a maze of hidden areas invisible from neighboring properties. The primary prison for the first 6 years is a soundproofed recording studio that Philip Garrido constructed before the abduction, a small building insulated against outside noise, where sounds from inside cannot escape to alert anyone who might be passing nearby. Jaycee is forbidden from speaking her real name. She becomes Alyssa, a fabricated identity imposed upon her through repetition and enforcement. The stun gun that Philip used during the abduction remains a constant threat, a tool of control that he references frequently to ensure compliance. He tells her that he knows everything she does, that he can see her thoughts, that any attempt to escape or reveal herself will result in pain worse than what she has already experienced. At 11 years old, isolated completely from any external reference point, she believes him. The adaptation that occurs in captivity is not a willing transformation but a necessary recalibration of survival instincts. Jaycee learns which behaviors trigger violence and which ones are tolerated. She learns to anticipate Philip's moods, to recognize the signs that precede his assaults, to make herself small and quiet when Nancy enters the compound with food or supplies. The journal she begins keeping during this period documents her internal world in fragments, entries that swing between hope and despair, between memories of her mother's face growing increasingly blurry and dreams of eventually returning home. In 1994, at the age of 14, Jaycee gives birth to her first daughter. There is no hospital, no doctor, no medical intervention of any kind. Nancy Garrido acts as midwife, delivering the baby in one of the sheds that comprise the backyard compound. The child is healthy despite the circumstances of her birth, and Jaycee names her, though this name will be changed later when Philip decides it does not suit his preferences. 3 years later, in 1997, Jaycee delivers a second daughter under identical conditions, again without medical assistance, again in the squalor of the hidden compound. The children are told from the beginning that Nancy is their mother and Jaycee is their older sister, a lie maintained so consistently that the girls accept it as unquestioned truth. Raising children while being held captive creates complexities that compound the existing horror of confinement. Jaycee attempts to provide her daughters with education despite having no materials and limited space, teaching them to read using whatever books Nancy brings into the compound, showing them how to identify constellations in the night sky, visible through gaps in the tarps overhead. She tells them stories, invents games that can be played in the cramped environment, tries to create moments of normalcy within circumstances that contain nothing normal. The girls grow up knowing only this world, understanding nothing of the life that exists beyond the fences, accepting their isolation as simply the way existence works. Meanwhile, outside the compound, the mechanisms that should have detected Jaycee's presence fail repeatedly and catastrophically. Philip Garrido is on parole, supposedly under intensive supervision due to his history of violent crime. Federal parole officers visit the residence 10 times between 1988 and 1999, conducting checks on Garrido's compliance with the terms of his release. Not once does any officer search the backyard thoroughly enough to discover the hidden compound. When federal parole expires, California state authorities assume responsibility for supervision. Between 1999 and 2009, state parole officers visit the Walnut Avenue address 60 times. They walk past the fences that conceal the compound. They speak with Philip in the front yard or inside the main house. They file reports indicating compliance with parole conditions. None of them find Jaycee. In November 2006, California implements Jessica's Law, legislation that mandates GPS monitoring for certain categories of offenders. Philip Garrido is fitted with an ankle bracelet that tracks his movements 24 hours per day, creating a digital record of where he goes and how long he remains in each location. The data from this device shows clearly that Garrido spends large portions of his time in the backyard area of his property, stationary for hours at a stretch in the exact location where Jaycee and her daughters are living in captivity. Parole officers review this data regularly as part of their monitoring duties. They note Garrido's presence in the backyard. They do not investigate what he is doing there, or why he remains in that specific area for such extended periods. A neighbor grows concerned about activities at the Garrido property in 2006, troubled by what she observes and what she hears. She contacts emergency services and reports that a man she describes as a disturbed individual is keeping women and children in tents behind his house. A deputy from the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department responds to the call, arrives at the Walnut Avenue address, and speaks with Philip Garrido in the front yard. The deputy does not search the property. He does not check whether Garrido is a registered offender. He does not investigate the backyard or verify whether the reported tents actually exist. The deputy completes his call and departs, filing a report that indicates no evidence of wrongdoing. 3 more years pass before anyone else questions what might be happening behind the house. As years accumulate, Jaycee's confinement evolves from total isolation toward a carefully controlled form of limited integration. Philip and Nancy operate a home-based printing business called Garrido Printing, and Jaycee gradually assumes responsibility for much of the actual work. Using her imposed identity as Alyssa, she communicates with customers, manages orders, handles finances. She speaks on the telephone, interacts via email, processes transactions that require her to use her assigned false name over and over until it begins to feel almost natural. This exposure to the outside world occurs always under strict supervision, and always with the implicit threat that any revelation of her true identity will endanger her daughters, a threat Philip reinforces constantly. The journal entries from this period reveal a consciousness struggling to maintain hope against overwhelming evidence that escape may never occur. She writes lists of dreams, activities she wants to experience if freedom ever comes: ride in a hot air balloon, swim with dolphins, write a best-selling book, visit pyramids. These aspirations exist alongside entries documenting depression so severe that getting through each day requires conscious effort, loneliness so profound that she sometimes forgets what it feels like to be part of a world larger than the compound. She writes about her mother, about struggling to remember Terry's face with clarity, about wondering whether anyone is still searching or whether the world has moved on and forgotten that she ever existed. In South Lake Tahoe, pink ribbons still hang from occasional surfaces, weathered and faded but replaced periodically by people who refuse to let the memory disappear entirely. Terry Probin maintains Jaycee's hope, continues organizing annual remembrance events, continues speaking to reporters whenever they show interest in covering the case. The marriage to Carl Probin dissolves under pressures that include grief, suspicion, and the simple impossibility of sustaining a relationship through years of unresolved trauma. Shayna grows from infant to child to teenager, developing no direct memory of the sister who disappeared before she could form lasting recollections. Law enforcement maintains the case file, adds occasional notes when new tips arrive, but generates no meaningful progress towards solving the abduction. The investigation has long since gone cold, the trail growing fainter with each passing year until it seems to exist only as a historical artifact, a reminder of a crime that will likely never be resolved. August 24, 2009. The University of California, Berkeley campus sits beneath clear summer skies, students and visitors moving between buildings in the unhurried rhythm of late morning. Philip Garrido walks across the central plaza, accompanied by two young girls who appear approximately 11 and 15 years old. He carries pamphlets advertising a religious event he hopes to organize, approaching people at random to distribute his materials and explain his vision for spreading what he describes as a transformative spiritual message. The girls hover near him, their postures suggesting discomfort or uncertainty, their eyes rarely making contact with the strangers their companion addresses. Campus police officers Lisa Campbell and Ally Jacobs observe this interaction from a distance, their attention drawn initially by nothing specific, just a general sense that something about the scene does not align properly. The girls look withdrawn, their clothing slightly disheveled, their body language conveying a quality that experienced officers learn to recognize even when they cannot articulate exactly what triggers the recognition. Campbell and Jacobs approach, identify themselves, and begin asking casual questions. Who are these children? What is their relationship to this man? Why are they here, instead of in school on a weekday morning? Philip provides answers that sound rehearsed, explaining that the girls are relatives, that he has permission to have them with him, that everything is entirely legitimate. The officers remain unconvinced. Something continues to feel wrong despite the surface explanations. They request identification, and Philip complies, producing documents that allow them to run a background check through law enforcement databases. The results appear within minutes, and the information they reveal transforms a routine interaction into something far more serious. Philip Craig Garrido is a registered offender on parole for kidnapping and assault. His criminal history includes a conviction in 1977 for abducting a woman from South Lake Tahoe and transporting her across state lines to Nevada, where he held her in a shed and committed repeated acts of violence. He served 11 years of a 50-year sentence before release on federal parole. The record indicates he is currently under supervision by California state authorities, bound by conditions that restrict his activities and require regular reporting to a parole officer. Officers Campbell and Jacobs contact Philip's assigned parole officer, Edward Santos Jr., and relay the situation. Santos expresses immediate surprise and concern. Philip Garrido should not be in the company of minor children under any circumstances. His parole conditions explicitly prohibit contact with anyone under the age of 18. The presence of these two girls represents a clear violation, one serious enough to warrant immediate action. Santos instructs the campus officers to document the encounter thoroughly, then contacts Philip directly and orders him to report to the parole office in Concord on August 26th for a mandatory meeting. He is to bring the children with him. He is to bring any other individuals currently living at his residence. Attendance is not optional. August 26th arrives with Philip Garrido appearing at the Concord parole office as instructed. Nancy Garrido accompanies him. The two girls are present, along with a woman who introduces herself as Alyssa, claiming to be a relative who helps with the children and assists with the printing business. Parole officers and investigators from UC Berkeley Police gather in an interview room, preparing to question everyone present until they understand exactly what is happening and who these people actually are. The interrogation begins with Philip, officers pressing him for details about his relationship to the children and the woman called Alyssa. His initial responses are vague and contradictory, stories that shift slightly with each retelling, explanations that raise more questions than they answer. He claims the children belong to a relative. He suggests they are temporary guests at his home. He provides names that officers cannot immediately verify. The inconsistencies accumulate, each one adding to the growing certainty that Philip is lying about something significant. Nancy sits in a separate room providing her own version of events, but her account fails to align with what Philip has said. The children, when interviewed individually, struggle to answer basic questions about their history, about where they go to school, about their parents and their living situation. Their confusion appears genuine, as though they are uncertain themselves about the truth of their own circumstances. Alyssa remains quiet, offering minimal responses when questioned, her demeanor suggesting someone who has learned to avoid drawing attention to herself. Hours pass. The questioning continues. Officers verify details, make phone calls, search databases for information that might clarify the situation. The pressure on Philip intensifies as discrepancies in his story become impossible to ignore. Finally, isolated in an interview room with investigators who make clear they will not accept further evasions, Philip's resistance collapses. He admits to kidnapping a child. He provides a year, 1991. He offers a name, Jaycee Dugard. He describes taking her from South Lake Tahoe and bringing her to his property in Antioch, where she has remained ever since. The officers receive this confession with a mixture of shock and immediate action. Jaycee Dugard disappeared 18 years ago. The case remains open, unsolved, one of hundreds of child abduction investigations that went cold after exhausting all viable leads. If this man is telling the truth, if the woman sitting in the adjacent room calling herself Alyssa is actually Jaycee Dugard, then they have just stumbled into the resolution of a case that law enforcement had largely given up hope of ever solving. They bring Alyssa back into the interview room and ask her directly, "Is your name Jaycee Dugard? Were you taken from South Lake Tahoe in June of 1991? The woman hesitates. 18 years of conditioning, of being told that revealing her identity will result in harm to her daughters, of living under the name Alyssa and pretending to be someone she is not, makes this moment extraordinarily difficult. But the investigators wait, giving her time and space to process what is being asked. Finally, she answers, yes, she is Jaycee Lee Dugard. She was 11 years old when Philip Garrido abducted her. The two girls are her daughters, born during captivity. She has been held at the Walnut Avenue property for 18 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Philip and Nancy Garrido are arrested immediately, taken into custody and charged with 29 felony counts, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and assault. The daughters, confused and frightened by the sudden disruption of the only life they have ever known, are placed temporarily in protective custody while authorities work to understand their needs and determine appropriate care. Jaycee, freed from captivity but thrust into a world that has changed dramatically since she was last part of it, begins the overwhelming process of reconnecting with a reality she has not experienced in nearly 2 decades. News of the discovery spreads rapidly through law enforcement channels and then into public media. In South Lake Tahoe, Terry Probin receives a phone call that she has waited 18 years to receive. Her daughter has been found. Jaycee is alive. The pink ribbons that have decorated the town for nearly 2 decades suddenly transform from symbols of hope into symbols of vindication, proof that refusing to give up can sometimes result in outcomes that seem impossible. August 27, 2009. A reunion 18 years in the making occurs in South Lake Tahoe when Terry Probin and Jaycee Dugard see each other for the first time since that June morning when a gray car carried her daughter away. The meeting is private, shielded from media cameras and public observation, a moment too profound and too fragile to share with strangers. Terry later describes Jaycee as appearing remarkably young, almost unchanged from the 11-year-old who disappeared, as though captivity somehow preserved her in stasis, while the world outside continued aging normally. Shayna, now 18 years old, meets the sister she cannot remember, attempting to forge a connection with someone who exists in family stories but not in her direct memory. The initial months following rescue present challenges that extend far beyond simple physical freedom. Jaycee and her daughters have spent years in isolation, their understanding of contemporary society limited to glimpses through controlled exposure and outdated information. Technology has evolved dramatically between 1991 and 2009. Cell phones have transformed from rare luxury items to ubiquitous necessities. The internet has expanded from academic curiosity to fundamental infrastructure, cultural references, social norms, even basic assumptions about how the world functions have shifted in ways large and small. Navigating this transformed landscape requires patience and guidance. Dr. Rebecca Bailey and the clinical service called Transitioning Families provide therapeutic support designed specifically for individuals and families recovering from extreme trauma and prolonged separation. The approach emphasizes gradual integration rather than forced rapid adjustment, allowing Jaycee and her daughters to process their experiences at a pace they can manage without becoming overwhelmed. Equine therapy becomes a significant component of their healing, the act of caring for and riding horses, providing opportunities to rebuild confidence and establish trust in relationships that contain no history of betrayal or manipulation. The daughters face particular complexity in understanding their situation. For their entire lives, they believed Nancy Garrido was their mother and Philip was a father figure. Learning that these fundamental assumptions were lies, that their actual mother is the woman they knew as their older sister, requires complete reconstruction of their sense of identity and family structure. They demonstrate remarkable resilience despite these revelations, described by those who work with them as intelligent and adaptable, capable of processing difficult truths and adjusting their understanding accordingly. Legal proceedings move forward with deliberate speed. Prosecutors in El Dorado County prepare charges related to the kidnapping and initial assault, while Contra Costa County develops cases addressing the years of captivity and ongoing crimes committed at the Antioch property. In early 2011, both Philip and Nancy Garrido enter guilty pleas to charges of kidnapping and assault, accepting responsibility in exchange for avoiding a trial that would require Jaycee and her daughters to testify publicly about their experiences. Both defendants waive their rights to appeal as part of the negotiated agreement. Sentencing occurs on June 2, 2011, in an El Dorado County courtroom where Judge Douglas Phimister presides over proceedings that draw significant media attention and public interest. Philip Craig Garrido receives a sentence of 431 years to life in prison, a term designed to ensure he will never experience freedom again, regardless of parole eligibility or good behavior credits. Nancy Garrido receives 36 years to life, a lesser sentence that reflects her secondary role, but acknowledges her active participation in crimes that spanned nearly 2 decades. Jaycee chooses not to attend the sentencing hearing, refusing to spend additional time in the presence of her captors. Terry Probin reads a statement on her behalf, words Jaycee composed carefully to express her perspective without requiring her physical presence. The statement addresses Philip directly, informing him that everything he did was wrong and expressing hope that he will eventually recognize the harm he caused. Regarding Nancy, Jaycee uses a single word: evil. The brevity of this assessment carries more weight than extended explanation could provide. Civil litigation seeking accountability and compensation proceeds on parallel tracks. In 2010, the state of California settles a lawsuit for $20 million, an acknowledgement that parole supervision failures directly enabled Jaycee's prolonged captivity. The settlement funds are intended to provide for medical care, psychological treatment, and educational opportunities for Jaycee and her daughters throughout their lives. However, efforts to hold federal authorities accountable for their role in failing to revoke Garrido's parole despite documented violations prove unsuccessful. A lawsuit filed under the Federal Tort Claims Act is dismissed by district court, and the dismissal is affirmed on appeal in 2016. Courts ruling that sovereign immunity protections prevent recovery under the specific circumstances of this case. Jaycee establishes the Jaycee Foundation in 2010, creating an organization dedicated to serving families experiencing severe trauma and major life disruptions. The Foundation's mission centers on creating protected spaces where healing can occur through combination of traditional therapeutic approaches and experiential programs. Services include intensive family reconnection experiences, law enforcement training, workshops designed to increase awareness and improve investigative skills, educational programs for children involved with legal systems, and school-based initiatives promoting empathy and compassion. The Foundation operates using funds from the California settlement and proceeds from Jaycee's literary work. 2 books document different phases of Jaycee's journey. A Stolen Life, published in 2011, provides detailed memoir of her kidnapping and captivity, becoming an immediate bestseller and reaching audiences worldwide. Freedom, My Book of Firsts, released in 2016, chronicles her experiences learning to navigate life after rescue, describing the challenges and victories of adapting to freedom after 18 years of imprisonment. Both works serve educational purposes while generating revenue that supports the Foundation's ongoing operations. The dreams Jaycee documented in journal entries during captivity gradually transform from impossible aspirations into accomplished realities. She learns to drive with instruction from her younger sister Shayna, earning her license within a year of rescue. She rides in a hot air balloon, experiencing the perspective of floating above landscape without barriers or constraints. She swims with dolphins, feeling the grace of creatures moving through water with complete freedom. She visits pyramids in Belize, standing before ancient structures that have endured for millennia. Each fulfilled dream represents reclamation of autonomy stolen during captivity. Systemic reforms emerge from analysis of failures that allowed Jaycee's captivity to persist undetected for 18 years despite supposedly intensive supervision. California's parole system undergoes comprehensive review, resulting in reduced reliance on GPS monitoring technology and renewed emphasis on traditional techniques including thorough property searches, neighbor interviews, and unannounced home visits. Law enforcement agencies receive enhanced training on recognizing signs of long-term captivity and human trafficking, using lessons from this case to improve investigative approaches. The intuition of officers Campbell and Jacobs, their willingness to trust instinct despite lack of obvious evidence, becomes standard teaching example in courses on effective policing. As of 2025, Jaycee continues living privately in California with her daughters, both of whom have attended college and built independent lives while maintaining close family connections. The daughters are described as resilient and accomplished, having overcome circumstances that could easily have resulted in permanent psychological damage. Jaycee remains president of the Jaycee Foundation, continuing advocacy work while protecting the privacy necessary for sustained healing. Pink ribbons still appear occasionally in South Lake Tahoe during anniversary commemorations, transformed from symbols of desperate hope into reminders that persistence can sometimes achieve outcomes that seem statistically impossible. The case endures as definitive illustration of both institutional failure and human resilience. 70 parole visits over 18 years failed to discover what 2 alert police officers identified in a single encounter on a university campus. $500 million spent annually on GPS monitoring technology proved less effective than human intuition and willingness to investigate suspicious circumstances. The transition from stolen life to freedom demonstrates that recovery is possible even from extreme trauma, that families can heal when provided appropriate support and protected spaces. Jaycee Dugard's journey from 11-year-old victim to advocate for trauma survivors serves as testament to the enduring capacity of human spirit to overcome circumstances designed to destroy it. What strikes you most about this case? The catastrophic failures that allowed it to continue, or the resilience that ended it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if stories of survival and justice matter to you, subscribe to stay connected with cases that reveal both the worst and best of human nature.